I always believed that being a father meant giving up parts of yourself for the sake of your child. From the moment my son came into this world, I worked my hands to the bone, trading sleep for overtime shifts, laughter for long commutes, and personal dreams for bills that never stopped arriving. I can still remember the first time I held him, his tiny fingers curling around mine, and I swore that no matter what life demanded of me, I would provide him everything I never had. I pictured us building a life together, me guiding him, him respecting me, and both of us sharing the kind of bond people write about in books. The years passed, and with every scraped knee, every birthday candle, and every new school uniform, I felt the weight of sacrifice, but I carried it proudly because I thought it was for something greater. Friends told me I was spoiling him, that I gave too much, but I silenced those doubts. He was my son, my blood, my purpose. What I never imagined was that all those nights of exhaustion and all those dreams I buried would one day be nothing more than invisible to the very person I had sacrificed them for. My son was the kind of boy who made people smile just by walking into a room. Teachers would pat me on the back, telling me how bright he was, how his future looked promising, and neighbors often said I was lucky to have such a polite, well-mannered child. And in those early years I believed them. He laughed freely, held my hand without hesitation, and his world revolved around the comfort of home. But as time went on, something in him began to change. It started small, with phone calls from boys I barely knew, late-night whispers in his room, and weekends spent outside rather than at the dinner table. At first I convinced myself it was normal. Teenagers drift, I told myself, but slowly, his smiles for me faded while the ones for his friends grew brighter. "Dad, you don't understand," he would say whenever I questioned his choices, slamming the door before I could reply. I watched helplessly as his loyalty shifted from the family that raised him to the friends who barely knew him. The more I tried to pull him close, the further he drifted, as though I was nothing but a shadow in the background of his new life. I tried to strike the balance every father wrestles with: discipline and freedom, guidance and trust. When he asked to stay out late, I allowed it, telling myself it was part of growing up, though I lay awake until I heard the creak of the front door. When he demanded space, I gave it, even when it left me eating dinners alone at a table set for two. I reminded him about respect, about the values I worked so hard to teach, but his replies were sharp, careless, laced with the arrogance of youth. "Dad, times are different now," he'd scoff, rolling his eyes as though my words were relics from another era. The sting wasn't just in his tone, but in the way he dismissed me, as if my role was reduced to the man who paid the bills. His friends became his compass. He turned to them for advice, for approval, for validation. And every time I tried to warn him that friends come and go, he laughed it off, saying I was old-fashioned, out of touch. The son I once carried on my shoulders now looked down on me, and I couldn't help but wonder if I had given him too much freedom, or perhaps not enough. I remember the night vividly, because I had planned it with the kind of care only a hopeful father could. It wasn't anything extravagant, just a family gathering, an evening where uncles, cousins, and old relatives would sit together, eat, laugh, and remind my son of the roots that held him. I cooked his favorite dish, set his place at the table, and when guests asked if he was coming, I smiled confidently and said, of course, he wouldn't miss this. But as the clock inched past the hour, my phone buzzed with a careless message: "Can't make it, hanging out with friends." My heart sank, but I held the phone close, trying to hide the disappointment from the curious eyes around me. One of the relatives chuckled softly, muttering, "Kids these days," while another shook his head and whispered, "Seems like he's too busy for family." I forced a smile, raising my glass as if it didn't matter, but inside I was bleeding. The laughter around the table felt distant, hollow, and every empty glance at his untouched plate was a dagger. That night, I realized it wasn't just absence. It was a choice, and he had chosen them over me. It was a Saturday evening when the truth slipped out, not meant for my ears but carried on careless laughter. I had gone upstairs to check if my son was home, only to find his door slightly ajar. Inside, his friends sprawled across the floor, cans of soda in hand, their voices sharp and unfiltered. "Your dad's just an ATM man," one of them said, and the room erupted in laughter. My son didn't defend me. He leaned back in his chair, smirking, and replied, "Yeah, he's good for money, not much else." The words hit harder than any blow I had ever taken. I stood frozen in the hallway, every memory flashing before me. The nights I skipped meals so he could eat. The years of labor I endured so he could wear branded clothes. The quiet sacrifices I never spoke of. To them, to him, I was nothing but a wallet with legs. My chest tightened, a heat rising in me I couldn't contain. But I didn't walk in, didn't shout or demand respect. Instead, I turned away, my footsteps silent on the stairs, carrying with me a wound that cut deeper than betrayal. It was the realization that my love had been reduced to currency. That night, I sat alone in the living room, the house eerily quiet except for the ticking of the clock that seemed louder with every second. I stared at the photographs on the wall. My son as a boy with cake smeared across his cheeks. His first day of school holding my hand, the time he won a medal and beamed as though the world belonged to him. Each image was a reminder of the years I had given away piece by piece. Years of working 2 jobs, of coming home bone, tired yet still managing a smile, of silencing my own dreams so his could breathe. And yet, those sacrifices had become invisible, forgotten, discarded like scraps on the floor. I whispered to myself, almost in disbelief, where did I go wrong? My chest felt heavy, not just with disappointment but with something darker, something that had been waiting quietly in the corners of my soul. The sting of betrayal twisted inside me, turning sorrow into steel. I realized then that love on its own had no weight in his world. In his eyes, I was only as valuable as the money in my pocket. And in that silence, a dangerous thought began to form. A few weeks later, I stumbled upon something that confirmed my worst fears. I had returned home earlier than usual and heard muffled voices coming from his room. His friends were huddled around him, their eyes gleaming with a kind of greed that spoke louder than words. Papers were spread across the desk, and as I inched closer, I caught fragments of their conversation. "Your dad's loaded," one of them whispered. "If he invests, we'll all be set. Just convince him. It's nothing for a guy like him." My son nodded eagerly, his tone sharp with confidence. "Don't worry. He always gives me what I want. He won't say no." My stomach knotted as I pieced it together. They weren't just using him, they were planning to use me, to drain the years of sweat I had poured into every dollar. I stood in the shadow of the doorway, unseen, listening as they sketched out a reckless business scheme that had failure written all over it. They weren't interested in building a future. They were vultures circling a carcass. And my son, my own flesh and blood, was leading them straight to me as though I were nothing more than prey waiting to be devoured. From that day on, I stopped being the blind, trusting father he thought I was. I didn't confront him, not yet. Instead, I began pulling back quietly, methodically, as though testing the strings of a puppet. The first step was subtle, small changes in his allowance, a few delays, in transferring money, casual excuses about unexpected expenses. I wanted to see if he would notice, if he would come to me for conversation or cling tighter to those so-called friends of his. His reaction was immediate and sharp. "Dad, where's the money? You always send it on the first." He snapped one evening, his voice carrying no gratitude, only entitlement. I shrugged, pretending absent-mindedness, but inside I was studying him like a stranger. The car expenses were next. When he complained about needing cash for fuel, I handed him a bus card instead, watching his pride crumble beneath the weight of inconvenience. Each move I made wasn't about saving money. It was about stripping away the illusion, forcing him to face what his world looked like without my wallet propping it up. And with every step back I took, his frustration grew, his loyalty to his friends deepening as though I were the enemy. Perfect. Exactly what I wanted. It didn't take long for the storm to break. The moment the flow of money slowed, his patience snapped like a brittle branch. He slammed doors, muttered curses under his breath, and spoke to me with a venom I had never heard before. "You don't get it, Dad. I need that money. My friends are counting on me," he shouted one night, his fists clenched, his eyes burning with fury. I stared at him, silently, letting the weight of his words sink in. Friends, always the friends. Not family, not me. When the car ran out of gas, he stormed into the kitchen demanding cash, only to find a bus pass sitting on the counter. The look on his face was pure disgust, as if I had insulted him by suggesting he live like an ordinary person. Instead of questioning his own behavior, he ran deeper into the arms of those boys, the same ones who whispered in his ear about quick riches and endless fun. I could see it clearly now. The more I withdrew, the more he clung to them, painting me as the villain in his story. But what he didn't realize was that the villain had already begun writing the ending. One evening, He came to me with a spark in his eyes, the kind of excitement that usually belongs to dreamers. He carried a folder stuffed with papers, charts, and figures he barely understood, but his voice was filled with certainty. "Dad, listen, this is it. My friends and I, we've got a business idea. It's genius. All we need is your investment, and we'll triple the money in no time." He spread the documents across the table, pointing at inflated numbers and meaningless graphs, his words tumbling out like a rehearsed pitch. I leaned back, watching him, pretending to be intrigued. I nodded, asked questions, and let him believe he was convincing me. Inside, I was already several steps ahead. I agreed to his plan, but with one small condition: everything would be in writing. A contract, legally binding, signed and notarized, ensuring that every dollar I gave would be tied to responsibilities, milestones, and accountability. His grin widened, mistaking my calm for trust, my agreement for surrender. He couldn't see the trap hidden in plain sight, the ink that would bind him not to success, but to failure. I let him walk away thinking he had won, when in reality, the game had just begun. It didn't take long before greed outweighed patience. My son, blinded by his friend's constant goading, grew restless with the conditions I had set. One night, long after I had gone to bed, I heard the faint creak of the study door and the shuffle of papers. I stayed silent in the shadows of the hallway, watching as he sat at my desk, his hands trembling slightly as he pulled out the contract. His friends had told him it was easy. That one signature stood between them and a pocketful of my hard-earned money. I saw him pick up my pen, hesitate for only a moment, then scrawl my name across the page with shaky confidence. He didn't realize I had replaced my signature pen with one that left invisible ink under UV light. He didn't realize the contract itself had been copied, every page marked with tiny details only I could recognize. As he tucked the forged papers back into the folder, whispering, "He'll never know," I felt a cold smile creep across my face. He thought he had outsmarted me, that betrayal could be neatly written in stolen ink. What he didn't know was that I had been waiting for this very moment. The day of reckoning arrived quietly, like a storm hiding behind a calm sky. My son swaggered into the house, his friends trailing behind him, all laughter and arrogance. They believed the money was already theirs, that the old man had been fooled. I invited them into the study, the same desk where he had committed his little crime. With a calmness that unnerved them, I slid the forged contract across the table. "Interesting signature," I said softly, tapping the paper with my finger. His smile faltered. The room fell silent except for the hum of the ceiling fan. I opened a drawer and pulled out the real contract, stamped, notarized, untouched by his desperate hand. "Did you think I wouldn't notice?" My voice was low, measured, but each word landed like a hammer. His friends shifted uncomfortably, sensing the noose tightening. Then came the blow he never expected. I revealed the frozen accounts, the trust funds redirected, the car he drove already transferred back into my name. Every safety net he thought was his had been stripped away with a few strokes of my pen. His face drained of color as realization sank in. He hadn't trapped me. I had trapped him. The fallout was swift and merciless. The moment the accounts froze and the car keys were taken back, the loyalty of his so-called friends evaporated. They stopped coming around. Their calls grew less frequent, until one day they vanished altogether, leaving him with nothing but silence. I watched from the doorway as he sat on the edge of his bed, staring at his phone, refreshing messages that would never come. "Bro, we'll stick with you no matter what," they had promised, but promises are cheap when wallets are empty. Soon after, I began hearing whispers, debts left unpaid, favors he couldn't return, humiliation that spread through his circle like wildfire. The boy who once strutted with pride now walked with shoulders slumped, his name spoken in pity or mockery. I saw him try to chase them down, begging for inclusion, but every door closed in his face. The very friends he had chosen over me abandoned him the moment the money dried up. And though it pained me to see my own blood reduced to this, there was a grim satisfaction in knowing he was tasting the bitter fruit of betrayal, the same flavor he had once served me without remorse. He came to me one night, his face pale, his voice stripped of arrogance. "Dad, I need help," he whispered, as though the walls themselves might mock him. I looked at him long and hard, studying the boy who had once clung to my hand but now stood hollow, abandoned by the very friends he chose over me. My silence made him restless. "They used me, Dad. They left when the money was gone. But you're my father. You'll help me, right?" His words were trembling, desperate, but to me they sounded like chains rattling too late. I leaned forward, resting my hands on the table, and for the first time I allowed the truth to spill with ice in my voice. You once chose your friends over me. Tonight, I choose my wallet over you. His eyes widened, horror and disbelief mixing with a dawning realization that this was no bluff. I wasn't angry, I wasn't shouting. I was calm, deliberate, the way a man sounds when he has already buried his grief. He opened his mouth to protest, but I turned away, leaving him to choke on the silence. Love had given him chance after chance. Now consequence would finish what love could not. I sat alone in the quiet hours of the night, the house echoing with memories that no longer felt like home. My gaze lingered on the empty chair across the table, the one where my son used to sit, legs swinging as he told me about his day, eyes wide with innocence. That boy was gone, replaced by someone who saw me as a ledger, a balance sheet, a bottomless well of cash. I thought about the sacrifices, the meals skipped, the debts endured, the years of labor I could never reclaim, and how easily he had dismissed them, how quickly he had traded love for greed. My heart ached, but the ache was cleaner now, stripped of illusions. Sometimes love must harden into stone so betrayal can find its weight. I knew the path I had chosen was not out of hatred but necessity, for a son who had to lose everything to understand the worth of anything. I whispered into the silence, as if he could hear me from his room of loneliness. One day, you'll know family is not a wallet. One day, you'll understand what you threw away. And with that, I let the silence close in, final and unbroken.